Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pestana. And we're here today with special guest, Elisabet Lahti, who's here to share with us her new book, Gentle Power, a revolution in how we think, lead, and succeed using the Finnish art of Sisu. So Dr. Elisabet Lahti is an award-winning educator, applied psychology researcher, and founder of the Sisu Lab, which builds communities and organizational cultures based on everyday leadership as an expression of courage and compassion. Her work has been featured in The New Yorker, Business Insider, BBC, and Forbes. Originally from Finland, she's taught internationally and given talks at Fortune 500 companies. So welcome to the show, Dr. Elisabet Lahti.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you here to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
Oh, goodness. It's really been in the making for a long time. I would say, in a way, about a decade. And when it really culminated, the idea of it in my mind was just in the beginning of the pandemic, actually. I had been researching Sisu, which is this Finnish construct for inner fortitude and having this ability to find strength when we feel that we have nothing left. So we've had this concept for about 500 years, and because of my own experiences, I ended up researching it and going really into the guts of this concept. But at the same time, I have been increasingly interested in understanding, well, how do we use these concepts that we research? Is it just that we tinker with these concepts, and how do we actually use them for a better life in our own lives and collectively? So when the pandemic began, that's when a light bulb hit. I had a light bulb go on, and I wanted to really do the work to distill Sisu into something that is elevating for the human soul and us as a community. So gentle power is the elevated, it is the positive, constructive expression of this inner fortitude that we have. And in a way, it's an entire way to spend one's life, because it will take a lifetime as we go between this toughness and then we bring in the softness. So it is a very, very curious topic, and I'm super excited to be here, getting to share some thoughts and have this conversation with you, Marianne.
So what is some of the research that you discovered on Sisu?
So the beginning point for this research on the concept was about 10 years ago. And at that time, I was going through a very traumatic and dramatic and difficult time in my own life. So this research and this inquiry and really this adventure, I would say almost, it happened because of my own personal need, which is kind of like the best inventions always are actually the result of something that we're personally going through. And so I asked the question, and what was keeping me up at nights was the question that how do humans overcome extreme adversity? How do we find strength? Who survives? Who doesn't? What can we learn from individuals who have overcome? And the question for me was that how did I survive? And where can I draw from so that I can find the fortitude to rebuild my life in some ways? And then I stumbled upon this concept from my own native culture, Sisu. It is spelled S-I-S-U, so it looks very unassuming, small word. And when I started to look into it, I discovered that there was really no research into this concept, which was pretty interesting because Sisu is described as one of these words in the Finnish culture that is most integral to our culture. They even say that you can't understand Finland or a Finn without understanding what Sisu is. So at the same time, it was quite surprising that when I ask people, what is Sisu? How is it defined? What is it actually? Is it a character strength? Is it something we can develop? Is it something that only Finns have? Or is it something that is just a story we tell? Does it even exist? So that was the beginning point. And I was at the time at the University of Pennsylvania. I was accepted to the program by Dr. Martin Seligman, who's the pioneer of this field called applied positive psychology. That is a branch and a research area within psychology that mainly looks at the strengths and the virtues that we draw from, the qualities we have that allow us to not only survive, but to build lives within which we can thrive and we can live purposefully. The idea in positive psychology is that just the absence of illness is not health. So there's more to human life than just mere survival. And in that program, when it was time to do our master's thesis, I happened to meet Dr. Angela Duckworth, who's the pioneer of the research on grit. She's an American scholar. And I was inspired by her work on grit, and I remembered this concept from my own native culture that I had been looking at. And that became my, initially just the graduate thesis. But then I saw the benefits of that to my own life. And I saw how much interest there was to Sisu, especially in the US, I have to say, in the beginning of this research. I kind of found that in Finland, it carried a little bit of this historical weight on its shoulders. But in the US, which was the birthplace for this research, which I'm so grateful for, that I had so many enthusiastic people there at the UPenn and in different parts of the country that really showed support for this work from the onset. I mean, now it's globally very much out there. There's my own book, and there's a couple of books by a journalist called Katja Pantsar, and it's really spoken a lot again about Sisu again. But at the time, it was quite unknown. And so one of the biggest discoveries was, of course, that, okay, Sisu is not just a story, and it is definitely not only a Finnish quality. It is a Finnish word, but it's a universal capacity of strength that every single human has. And its message really is this idea to be able to open our hearts to hope and faith when we assume that there's nothing left in us. So Sisu is different from psychological concepts such as perseverance, grit, hardiness, and because it is not only about this kind of a psychological capacity or a willpower that we use in a cognitive way, which means to use our problem solving and intellectually solve our way and just have the willpower. But Sisu really means to dig into the fibers of us when life gets very tough. So in those moments, the message is that to all of us, that there's more strength to us than what meets the eye at a given moment. It is sometimes the last resort, which allows us to continue, and it allows us to take the next step. Or sometimes, as I say, that Sisu is the next heartbeat, or the next breath or the next step, as I've done a lot of ultra running. So it condenses into the smallest increments sometimes.
What did you find were some of the origins of Sisu?
Well, as a concept, its etymology is from a word that is sisus. So you just add an S to the end, which literally denotes interior or inside or the guts. And we've had this word in the Finnish culture for about 500 years. And its meaning has changed over time. Why it's very important to bring these kinds of concepts to the research field is because by doing so, we can expand the dialogue that we're having, because it's sometimes quite one-sided, that a lot of the research that is being done, a lot of it is in North American tradition, and there is so much wisdom regarding the human experience that we can derive from other cultures in the Western world and also in the Eastern world. Like in Japan, there's ikigai that has been researched. That is this word that denotes our sense of reason for our life, the reason why we wake up in the morning. And so Sisu is a word that comes from another culture, and it adds an actual psychological word and a concept to the psychological research tradition. And Sisu is, in Finland, everyone knows about Sisu, and we grew up with this concept. And it's, I would say that the big glory day of Sisu was about 100 years ago, when there were some very successful Finnish long distance runners, and they would say that, they had the Sisu to push through. So when you dig deep and you find something more within yourself. But then also during the Second World War, when Finland was against the Soviet army during what's called the Winter War, and it's called the miracle of Winter War, actually, because Finland was able to endure the invasion without losing their independence. And that was actually the time when Sisu also kind of landed in the United States for the first time. There was a New York Times front cover article where it was stated that Sisu is the word that describes Finland. And it was kind of described as this fortitude that allowed Finns as the underdog to overcome this pretty much an impossible opponent. So Sisu is usually about if we are the underdog, or maybe I'll describe these three categories from my research. There's a paper I published in 2019, which is open access, so it's out there, anyone can find it. It's titled Embodied Fortitude, an introduction to the Finnish concept of Sisu. And one of the qualities of Sisu there is what I call an action mindset. And this means that when life brings something our way that we want to do, or we have a dream, but it feels like it's extremely difficult for us to go after it. It might feel that it's really beyond our reach. It can be something as simple as from a personal front. It can relate to parenting, which is something that definitely is a crucible that tests anyone. And we often might feel that we run out of energy, that we might need this action mindset and the ability to take on action on something that feels very impossible. Let's say if we want to build a new relationship after we have been heartbroken. It can be the courage to quit our job and start something new, maybe start our own company. So Sisu relates to all these aspects of our lives where humans endure and we face these boundaries that we all have. So that is an action mindset, the courageous approach toward challenges. And Sisu also is what I call this kind of extraordinary perseverance. So, which means that it goes beyond the usual daily nuisances. And it is something that we visit when we need that extra power reserve. It's almost like if you would sign up for a marathon. And usually what happens that around 3/4 in, around about that, people describe that they hit what they call a wall, where they come to the end of their preconceived and assumed capacities. But at the same time, even though most people feel like they have to quit and they can't go further, and that's why it's called the wall. It literally feels like you're running into a wall and you can't keep pursuing what you're doing, or keep running. And yet people report that they find this, what's like a second wind or a third wind, like William James maybe would have described it. It was the founder of modern psychology. And most people finish the race. So Sisu is that moment when we dig into this hidden reserve of power. And then the third component of Sisu, which is very interesting, is that it is what I would call intestinal fortitude, or this latent hidden power, which is different, as I a little bit mentioned. It's different from this psychological capacity that we have, but it is connected to more of a visceral or somatic power circuitry within humans. And this is a field that's been researched for a long time, and luckily now it's hitting the mainstream more, what's called embodied fortitude, as opposed to embodied cognition, as opposed to just mere psychological cognition, which means that our body actually has quite a huge say in our decision making and how we react to different kinds of situations, including those that are very tough. So Sisu as this capacity of inner fortitude that relates to a somatic component, or the visceral side of our being. In the future, one of the research areas for Sisu is the microbiome also, not just Sisu, but all these qualities we have, from courage to grit, and to see that how does our enteric nervous system actually influence our brain and how we make decisions. So Sisu is, to kind of summarize it, it is the ability to take action against nearly impossible odds. It is discovering and living through this reality of humans that we all have, is that we have these hidden strengths that we all have, and all of our human evolution has pretty much been based on this, that we're able to dig deep in very, very tough moments. And it is true to the human nature. And then the third, that there is a strength within us, which is not just the cognitive or the mental, but it's actually deep within the human soma and the human body.
Thank you for going through that. I just really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And also, to kind of get to some of the basics here, when we talk about gentle power, what does that refer to?
So gentle power is the constructive, elevating use of Sisu. It's very important here, and I'm glad you're bringing up the gentle power component already in the beginning of the interview, because what came up from the research, that's also a very important dimension of Sisu, is that not all Sisu is good. It can easily be kind of heard, or it might sound like this superpower, that it will fix everything, that it's a miracle drug. But when we use our Sisu, and when we start to consciously start to develop our Sisu, it comes with this invitation to start also looking at what is the quality of our Sisu. One reason why Sisu is a little bit, it's a fascinating concept, in addition to being a psychological construct, is because in its native culture in Finland, it's also very strongly associated to integrity and this kind of a high quality in how we do things, which means there's a moral component to Sisu. So Sisu is also, it's not just willpower or perseverance or this formidable doggedness, but Sisu is about what we do when nobody is looking. So when we are by ourselves, and it relates to this, what kind of effort do we put? Do we do things well? And do we do things in a way that is life-giving, or if it's not? Because Sisu can, as easily as it can be a positive quality, it can also turn into what I call dark Sisu. So when, let's say, our power becomes force. And in the research I did some years ago, which is again in the same research paper I just mentioned, there's a finding that relates to this idea that there's 3 types of harm that if one has too much Sisu, or the Sisu is not the good kind, that there can be harm to oneself, where when we use Sisu too much and we don't balance it out with enough gentleness, it can lead to taking challenges and carrying them on way beyond our actual capacity. So Sisu is also not a message that we are superhumans. We're very much called to find the next edge, and push beyond it. But Sisu comes with an invitation for cultivating reason and attunement and understanding, so we know how far we can push. And no one can really advise us on this one. So it is a call, an invitation for self-awareness and to understand ourselves. But so if we push too much, the result can be a burnout, which I've gone through. It might be familiar to some of our listeners, especially in this time. And secondly, Sisu can cause a lot of damage also. This inner fortitude, when we take it to when it's too much, we can become merciless toward other people. And that breaks this sense of safety that we humans need to feel with one another, whether it's a workplace, especially, in families where parents need to be able to offer a safe, accepting place for our children. But what also happens sometimes is that if the parents haven't been able to incorporate and integrate this toughness and also having softness, or they haven't been able to incorporate the softness with the toughness, there is a lack of either of these two. And we easily impose that way of kind of responding and reacting to our children. We might be too harsh on them, or we might be too soft on them. So when we're too hard, it breaks that sense of safety again, and the children might end up developing an attachment style where we have to seek for that shelter from ourselves. It's harder for us to forge and create safe connection as adults. And Diane Poole Heller, by the way, is an amazing expert who might be a beautiful guest for the show too, if she hasn't already been. She's fantastic, and she has done decades of research into attachment style. And so to go back to more specifically Sisu, and then the third one is when we have too much Sisu, it can blur our decision making and our discernment. We get stubborn, we get too hell-bent on something that we once decided as our goal or a direction where to go. So Sisu in itself is merely a tool. It's a vehicle. And like with any tool, like with fire, for example, we can use fire to warm food, or we can use fire and, in a way that it's going to burn our house. So Sisu in the same way, it is a tool and a capacity that has an immense power to allow us to break through, break free, transform our lives, overcome extreme adversity and keep us alive. But at the same time, this life force being so strong, it needs, as its pairing, it needs gentleness. In the Eastern philosophy, we can speak of these as yin and yang, where the yang is the toughness, the hardness. It's also called the masculine energy. And the yin is the nurture, the care, the soft, also called the feminine energy. These don't mean genders. These mean that it's an energy and a way of doing. And each human has yin and the yang. And the invitation to develop Sisu in a constructive way means that we're able to develop both of those sides in ourselves. We bring in the fortitude, which is the Sisu, the toughness, the ability to have the hard conversations, the ability to have discipline, to do the work, to do our inner work, do the hard things in life. We depend on that. At the same time, we equally much depend, and I would say that even more, we depend on the ability to nurture ourselves, nurture other people. I want to kind of mention actually a little quote from the book of from Tao Te Ching, that even though even there in that tradition, the wish or the intention is to make these two qualities harmonious and they're in balance. But even the Tao Te Ching says that we must know the yang, the masculine energy and the toughness, but we must abide to the yin. So we must live our lives from softness. So you can almost imagine it that, you're holding something in your arms. Just a little personal note, whenever I meditate, how I tend to place my hands in order to remind myself of this importance of the feminine principle and the softness and the nurture from which all life really grows, and it's the only way for us as humans to stay connected to one another is by the virtue of this ability to connect, which is the yin and the softness. So I place my hand so that my left hand, which in some traditions is kind of seen as the feminine side, is the left, and then the yang, the toughness, is the right hand. So I usually place my left hand below first, and then I place my right hand beautifully resting in the palm of my left hand. So it physically reminds me to cultivate this ability to remain gentle with myself and with others. I guess it's worth mentioning that this Sisu and gentleness, it is a continuum. So when someone reads the book, for example, because it is called Gentle Power, so for someone, it might be more important to learn ways how to actually develop their power and develop their Sisu, develop their sense of self-worth, to have really strong boundaries, find ways how to develop their discipline, and just kind of like ramp up the ante. How do you say it beautifully? Or increase the fire. But for someone else, it might be actually what they need to do to bring the balance is to develop more gentleness in the form of self-care, in the form of being able to be more tender and accepting with other people and keep our heart open, as I like to call it. For me, personally, historically, it has been easier to be tough on myself. That was kind of the survival pattern that I developed as a child, that I found that strength in me. And then throughout life kind of showed me that, ultimately, I need to take care of myself anyways. And it's very, it's a wise, beautiful system, how our minds and our bodies are always looking to keep us alive and protected. But sometimes we end up creating mechanisms that end up standing in between our ability to connect with other people and ourselves. So for me personally, the journey recently over the past years has been to develop more gentleness and more softness. So gentle power is the positive, it's the constructive version and essence of Sisu. And for me personally, it's as important it is to talk about Sisu and bring this concept to people's awareness. And we can't have a conversation about Sisu without also speaking about compassion, without also speaking about this gentleness as a principle. So they're both important, and it's truly a lifelong path to do the work where we are able to slowly find more balance between the two, because it is very easy to kind of veer off on one end or the other.
It seems to be a constant like seesaw for many people, especially when we look in business. So how are we able to develop more harmony in our business relationships and leadership roles?
Yeah, it's definitely not, it is not easy, as we all know. The grounding and the base and the foundation for all of this development of Sisu as gentle power and developing our fortitude or developing our gentleness, it starts with awareness, with the intention that we come to a place in our lives where we are willing to develop and evolve. There really is no shortcut, to be honest, of any kind of development. And the only way how to do anything in life is that it comes through practice. And in the book, I introduced this concept of sadhana, which came to my attention. It's a Sanskrit word, and it's when I was living in India over a decade ago. And it usually refers to some kind of a spiritual practice through which the student seeks to attain enlightenment. So it's a really deep, disciplined commitment to a spiritual path. How I use sadhana is kind of in its translation as daily practice. So gentle power and Sisu as this high octave version, I would say, it's most importantly and ultimately, it's an invitation for self-inquiry. And to, as the ancient Greek wisdom goes, carved in the temple of Apollo in Delphi, which is know thyself. And this is really one of the aspects of Sisu that gets me so excited that I even wanted to write the book. That it's not only about what we do, but it is about how we do what we do. And because it is about how we do what we do, it entails an opportunity and a possibility for us as human beings to become, to make the way toward our highest potential. And this also involves us not just as individuals, but even more so at the very difficult domain of human relationships and relating. So, and this is our families, which is sometimes the toughest because the people who are closest to us, we tend to be our most vulnerable, open selves with them. And that's why it's also sometimes the toughest area of development. In work and business life, number one, starting with awareness that how am I with people? One, how I would do it personally to start with is I would start to look at how do people behave around me? How do they react to my presence? Do they share things with me? Do they leave the room? Do they stop talking? Bringing awareness to even just tracking a simple little thing of how much airtime do I use when I speak with people? One of the most beautiful ways to introduce this kind of curiosity and gentle power in interpersonal communication is to pay a little bit more attention to being curious about other people around us. And when we're talking, not thinking about my answer or what to say next, but really allowing there to be presence and curiosity for the other person. Because when we do so, we naturally help co-regulate each other's nervous systems, where people will feel more safe and they will feel more seen. That is a very simple practice of gentleness and gentle power, which is the easiest probably to take. But that too requires a level of self-awareness, which is at the same time I'm being present with someone else, and at the same time I'm monitoring myself. So I'm a little bit dividing my attention. So that's one way to start building more rapport as a use. Another way, which is a practical tool that I have sometimes advised for companies, which allows people to get to know each other in terms of not just names and titles and the more kind of shallow, maybe details of our life and these life occurrences, but to do this exercise that I call simply stories of Sisu. So having maybe whenever it's possible, but let's say once a month or however it might fit, in the structure, but sharing these moments as a community, a work community, where I overcame something tough, either in my past, it can be a broader share of a moment of Sisu in one's life. Another thing can be that those moments during the daily or weekly events that we get to actually share that what did we do well, where we overcame ourselves and by ourselves. And what this allows us to do is to start to see each other through the lens of this Sisu and this very human quality that we all have, which is that we're all humans and we all struggle with something. And one of the most beautiful gifts of Sisu is that I believe it can allow us to see each other's humanity even more. Because ultimately, we are all pretty bare in the face of adversity. We all face them, and to push them at arm's length from our lives, that we don't show up as full selves, that we only show up with our success and our strength and our, when we put on the smiley and the happy face. There's a part of this common sense of shared humanity that does not get communicated. And at the same time, I understand that work is a place where we have to come to perform, and we must come there to, show me the numbers. We must get the work done. But there is a paradox or a secret to understanding the power of gentleness. Gentleness is not about being passive. It is not about being meek or weak or lazy. Gentleness is power. Even so, how Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations that gentleness is invincible. There's a French philosopher, late French philosopher called Anne Dufour-Montel, who said that gentleness invents an expanded presence. And why gentleness is so powerful, that we also need to cultivate it in the office, in the form of compassion, in the form of soft skills, listening, presence, is because when people feel that they have a safe environment, there is what could be called emotional safety or psychological safety. We are actually able to tap into more of our cognitive resources and reserves that we need for problem solving, that we need for enduring extremely tough situations when we need to perform under high pressure in a time window that's extremely small, and things are very difficult. We actually perform better when we have the sense of support from our community, and when our nervous system is at rest, which means is that our parasympathetic nervous system is the one that is activated. And the reason for this is simply the functioning of the human brain. Because during the course of evolution, our brain has been programmed and hardwired to use very narrow kind of information focusing when we feel that we're under threat or under pressure. So our vision field even not literally narrows. This research done by Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. She's a magnificent woman of the field of psychology as well, that I encourage people to check out. And what she's found is this effect called broaden and build, in which when people experience positive emotions, such as trust, emotional safety, that the other person is present with us, which means that our nervous system is at rest, we're able to tap into the cognitive resources that I just mentioned, and we're able to perform well and have more courage to take risks in our lives even. So I would warmly encourage the conversation and the practice of really welcoming the effort to build more emotional safety and bringing these practices that relate to compassion into our leadership. It is not fluffy. It is not fluff. There is a lot of hard numbers and data to back up the research that shows us there are less turnover, there's less sick leaves, there's less heart disease, People are doing well and they are performing much better when they have this sense of positive environment and safety.
So that means that we don't disown our boundaries and self-worth in order to keep that power, right?
Exactly. Yes, indeed. Yeah. There's definitely a very prominent invitation in the book to understand and explore what's our relationship to our power. There's a reason why the book is called Gentle Power, not maybe, like the benefits of gentleness, or something. But power, I can see it is a topic that it evokes emotions in people. Even when I was writing the book and some people read the manuscripts, I would get comments like, it's great that you're writing about Sisu. This is wonderful. We need it. But why do you have to talk about power? Or if you're writing about gentleness, why do you have to mix power into it? Isn't there too much of misuse of it that would be better off just focusing on gentleness? But the main point here is, and the challenge, that because in every single encounter that we have, power is exchanged. We as humans, we relate to one another in these kinds of dimensions where there is also a sense of a power. So if we don't have the conversation with ourselves, whether we have resentment for it, due to maybe we've had an experience where we have misused our power in the past, or someone has misused their power on us, which has left this kind of fear or resentment that it's better just to sign off. But if we don't hold our own power and get comfortable and be friends with it, someone else will take that power and they will use it. And especially I would feel that this time that we're in is an invitation for every woman and man to have the courage to really look into what is our relationship with it. And that is, in practice, it means to have the courage to communicate what our boundaries are. When we do gentle power, we learn how to even communicate boundaries in a way that is not hurtful or it's not immediately directly disrupting. Some people might mind when we communicate boundaries, but in some moments that's then a invitation for them to feel into why does it feel so bad when someone says no or I get rejected. So all of these topics, they all hold a tiny little seed of wisdom that relates to us becoming more aware of who we are as humans and cultivating that self-awareness that is really the foundation for everything that we do as humans and our growth.
Is there a tip people can take that they can start implementing gentle power in their daily lives?
Yes, and it is to start immediately, doing it with a lot of curiosity, and just being very patient with ourselves, but remaining consistent. I speak of these micro actions of gentle power and the practice in the book. So no matter how slow the pace sometimes might feel, I did a lot of ultra running in my past, and what I learned there, and what is one of the principles, is that it doesn't really matter how fast you go. Quite the contrary, sometimes we must reduce our pace to a near walk and to simply kind of move on, and we do it very slow. But when we keep practicing and we keep entertaining some kind of a new habit, it does become ingrained. And just like Aristotle said, that excellence is ultimately, it is a habit. So it is something that we repeatedly do. And this is based on the simple fact that our brain is plastic. So neuroplasticity. When we do the practice and we keep repeating something that we want to kind of become embodied in us, it does create neural pathways. And then what was once a tiny little path becomes a highway, and it becomes our go-to reaction in some kind of a situation. So ultimately, gentle power becomes a sort of kind of graceful strength, where it's our go-to reaction to find a balance between the hard and the soft. There is a section at the end of the book where I propose certain methods, what one can use, but it's really about finding and feeling into that. What is that one thing, not many, but just one thing that your heart talks to you about, that feels that it calls to you how to develop your sense of discipline, or your sense of gentleness toward yourself. Maybe it's a practice of self-care. And then the most important key is that we take action immediately. We do that one thing, and we do that thing again the next day and the next day. If we fall off the wagon, we pick up and we keep doing it. So it is simple little steps, many times repeated, that is truly the key. And we all know this, it's not really nothing too complicated.
So where do you think that sometimes people get stuck or hung up?
Well, I definitely know where I get hung up sometimes. And a lot of it has to do with our inner narrative, that we ascribe sometimes an entire story to some kind of a challenge or a failure that we have experienced. And what can happen is that we end up going on these endless loops, downward spirals, where we get kind of looped into a negative self-talk. And one of the most important things we can do to free ourselves from that downward spiral is to do a practice, and I'll mention a couple of, is to do a practice where we're able to come back to the now moment. There is in the brain, there's a little bit of more neuroscience here now, because it is the handbook of us, so it's important to know certain little things about how we function as humans, what's under the hood, under the lid. And one of the things is that there is a thing called the default mode network in the human brain. And this is the network that's, if we kind of leave our brain by itself and we just let it kind of run its own course, it is going to be on this default mode network, as the name proposes. But what this default mode network does is that it functions under the premise of how human brain is organized and programmed to avoid death and help it sustain life, reproduce. So basically, its number one function is to keep life going and keep us alive. What it does in order to do so is that it constantly will either go in the past or it'll go in the future. It's going to be scanning for future threats and simulating them, or it's going to take you in the past. When you, for example, when it's 3 a.m, you're supposed to be sleeping, and then your brain digs out something from 30 years ago, what you did, which you haven't even remembered for the past few decades. That is the default mode network, because it's trying to scour for information that could be useful for survival. And now, the beauty of this, we have the brain, we have the mind, but we also have our friend, which is sometimes the forgotten friend, which is our body. And the beauty of the body is that it is always in the now. So one simple way to bring us back from those downward spirals of negative thinking and the storytelling that can really veer us off from actually going toward where we want to go. And I'm sure most listeners know exactly what I'm talking about. It's almost like you know what you're supposed to be doing and thinking, and we do the exact opposite to our own demise. One of the practices that I do is I used to do a lot of meditation I do more breath work nowadays, which I'm sure many have heard about. It's luckily getting a bit more visibility and traction on the popular conversation too. But when you do the breathing workshop, breathing exercise, you immediately bring your attention back to the body, and you bring it off from that default mode network, the DMF, which is associated with anxiety, rumination, depression, and all kinds of these negative compound effects. So finding a practice that works with you. For someone, it could be meditation, but I would personally recommend breath work because it literally connects you to the body and also to your parasympathetic nervous system. What you can also do, and you can try this if if someone has trouble sleeping, for example, or in the daytime when you feel very agitated, is to simply do what's called the box breath. And it's imagining this box in front of your eyes, and you breathe in, for example, 5 or 6 seconds. You breathe in, then you pause your breath for 5 or 6 seconds, and then you breathe out for 5, 6 seconds. You again pause for the same amount of time, and you do maybe 4 or 5 rounds of this, and just try it out for yourself, because there is a difference what life feels like when we are in that default mode network and in the mind, in the world of stories. And when we actually come back to the body, things clear up. It feels more clear. We feel more grounded and solid. And the beauty of it is that we carry breath with us wherever we go. It is the friend that we've had since the first moment we were born. And it is with us in each second of the day. So why not befriend breath and finding how we can help ourselves through these qualities and capacities that we already have.
My goodness, your book is such a beautiful resource for how to really have a more, I think, impactful life. Being able to lead and be comfortable in our own bodies. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
My website is sisulab.com. And so all the links are there. So everything is there. I most often post on Instagram, for example, and would love to be in touch with our listeners. So can drop a note if there's a question or something. I would love to address them and answer the questions. Also, I've just started doing a podcast myself. It's in its very beginning. So all the questions would be answered in the Sisu Lab podcast in the coming weeks and months.
How exciting is that? Well, Elisabet, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Elisabet Lahti. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Gentle Power, a revolution in how we think, lead, and succeed using the Finnish art of Sisu. Gentle Power is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If they don't have it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. On that note, we're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after these messages. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.